Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening.
Lucian stood before him. "Are you remorseful for what you've done?" he asked in a low voice. Colby smiled bitterly. What difference does that make? I will never forgive myself for nearly causing Dr. Jarvis' death over my selfishness. He looked up at Lucian and spoke with a tone filled with hatred and disgust for himself. People are insatiable creatures. Initially, I was happy just working with her. Then, I wanted to be as close as possible to her, so I became her assistant. Not long after that, I wanted her to look at me like how she looks at you. My desire grew as the days passed. I don't even know what I was doing. Lucian studied him, trying to discern the sincerity in his words. Colby seid. Now that I look back on the two mistakes I've made, regardless of whether it was starting the fire or sabotaging the laboratory, the slightest lapse in vigilance could have caused a major catastrophe. Aside from Dr. Jarvis, the other researchers in the Research Institute might have lost their lives by my hand. I deserve to be where I am for my crimes. Having confessed his feelings to Roxan on the day of his arrest, he finally understood that when he was escorted into the police car. However, it was too late for contrition. Because of that, Colby had never considered submitting an appeal to overturn his conviction. Instead, he wished to serve his sentence to alleviate the guilt within him. What do you plan to do after you get out?" Lucian asked unexpectedly. Colby was stunned. He seemed to have never considered the matter. He lowered his gaze for several seconds before answering. "Maybe I'll become a traveling doctor, as my chances of employment at a research institute or hospital are uncertain. As long as people believe in me, I will provide free medical treatment to compensate for what I've done." After observing him for a while, Lucian gathered enough to ascertain every word of his rang true. What about Roxan?" he asked. "You still owe her an apology." Colby's eyes flashed with guilt. I will apologize to her. She is still the best doctor I've ever known." Lucian nodded meaningfully at that. Colby frowned, puzzled. "You don't believe me?" "I do, which is why I want to make you an offer on Roxan's behalf to have you come back to the Research Institute after you get out." Colby's eyes widened with disbelief. What did you say?" "After all the awful things I've done, Lucian still wants me to work alongside Roxan. Did I hear him right? What could have possessed him to do so?" "I would like you to return to work at the Research Institute after your sentence ends," Lucian repeated calmly. "As you said, you are the longest-serving assistant of Roxan's. Though you have done wrong, you have made amends in time, showing me you have truly repented. You're welcome to work alongside Roxan again after your release." Colby still had not regained his composure. Suddenly, Lucian changed the subject as his expression grew stern. "However, you will be under my supervision. I guarantee you will be thousands of times worse off if you get any ideas." Colby took a long time to gather himself before nodding slowly, still stupefied with disbelief. Lucian retracted his gaze. "I want to thank you for your words earlier. I won't give in, and Roxan will get better." Colby felt a sudden sense of relief at those words. "As she will. I hope you'll let me know when you get married so I can wish you well." Lucian inclined his head. The men exchanged a final glance in silence. Colby watched Lucian leave before allowing himself to be escorted back to his cell. With his mind buzzing with Colby's words as he emerged from the facility, Lucian gradually regained his calm. "I have done everything I can. From here, it's only waiting and hoping. Either the doctors will think of something before the deadline, or I will have to give in to Jack. Before then, the only thing I can do is with Roxan." Spurred by that thought, he stepped on the gas and sped toward the hospital. It was dusk when he arrived. Lucian had Caden pick up dinner for the medical specialists at the hospital. They dined on the large table in the conference room. Still uneasy, Madeline remained by Roxan's bed. She stood up upon his arrival. How did it go? Did you discover anything? Lucian shook his head, but his expression did not look as pale as when he had left. There was even a glimmer of optimism in his eyes. Nothing yet, but I believe no harm will come to Roxan. After speaking, he observed Madeline's expression. Being fraught with worry for 2 days straight did Madeline's pallor no good. Her eyes and brow were lined with fatigue. Go get some rest, Lucian said. I had Caden book some rooms in the hotel next door. Everybody needs a good night's rest. Madeline glanced at Roxan, her brows furrowing. I'm worried about her. Besides, I rested the night before. You, on the other hand, need some. Roxan will be sad if she wakes up and sees you like this. Lucian nodded. I'll stay with her tonight and get some rest here. You've been running around the entire day and will continue to do so tomorrow. We cannot handle the consequences of any mishap from fatigue. At that, Madeline finally nodded. If anything unusual happens to her, call me. I'll keep my phone on, she reminded him before leaving. Lucian nodded. Only then did Madeline feel assured enough to depart with the group, who were still discussing Roxan's condition on their way to the hotel. I had heard of Dr. Jarvis when she was abroad, but by her Austronesian name. I thought she was around our age. Imagine my shock when I found out she was Dr. Lambert's disciple, who was in her 20s. Exceptional traditional medicine practitioners are becoming increasingly rare. What a shame that something like this happened to this one. Mr. Farwell has not slept in 2 days for Dr. Jarvis. I pity the young couple. We can't let anything happen to her. Madeline gradually regained some faith as she listened to the group's chatter. With so many talented doctors working together, in addition to old Mr. Lomax's assistants, nothing will happen to Roxan. At the same time, she felt thankful. It's fortunate that Roxan is with Lucian. If not for the Farwell family's wealth, we wouldn't have been able to hire this many skilled doctors. Following Madeline's departure, pin-drop silence filled the air inside the ward. Lucian dragged a chair over and sat beside the bed. He grasped Roxan's hand with a tender look spread across his face. Don't worry, Roxan. Everyone is thinking of ways to save you. Even old Mr. Lomax is here. He's currently browsing through references with Jonathan to figure out how to treat you. I believe he will definitely come up with a solution. I think you would want to meet him too, Lucian said patiently despite knowing she couldn't hear him. I'm also aware of Archie and Benny's parentage now. I'm sorry for not discovering they are my children earlier. I'm also grateful I didn't treat them with prejudice because I mistook them as another man's offspring. You've raised them well. On the other hand, I failed to take good care of our daughter. Because of me, our 3 children grew up in an incomplete family. Now that I know the truth, I only wish to do my best to compensate you all, but that can only be done provided that you wake up. You will tough this out for the kids, won't you? Gently rubbing his fingers against her hand, he unwittingly tightened his grip and fell silent for a few seconds before adding, if the doctors still can't think of a solution after 3 days, I will have no choice but to agree to Jack's request. By then, he will undoubtedly force me to marry another woman. I hope that after you regain consciousness. He paused for a few moments before letting out a sigh of resignation. When you regain consciousness and wish to hate me, you can do so. It was my fault for failing to safeguard you, so this is a burden I deserve to bear. Roxan did not respond even after he muttered the long speech. In the end, Lucian's heart ached so terribly that he couldn't speak further. He could only sit on the side of the bed and gazed at her in silence. Another sleepless night ensued. The next morning, Lucian got up and left the ward when the doctors came to do their rounds. Standing in the corridor and watching the doctors doing their jobs, Lucian couldn't stop himself from taking out his phone and contacting Jonathan. He lost contact with Peregrine after the latter's last visit to the hospital. He wondered if Peregrine had thought of any treatment plans. It took a while before Jonathan answered. What's the matter, Lucian? Did Roxanne's condition destabilize again? Jonathan whispered. Obviously, he was hiding in a corner, speaking with an undertone. Lucian knitted his brows. Are you still browsing through references? Jonathan nodded. We stayed up the whole night yesterday and almost searched all the medical-related books in the library, but at the thought of the outcome, Jonathan hesitated to speak. We've gone through so many references, yet old Mr. Lomax is still clueless about how to cure Roxanne's condition. He couldn't bring himself to inform Lucian of that depressive news. Lucian's heart sank as he managed to guess the lack of progress. Still, he didn't probe further and merely said, help me express my gratitude and take good care of old Mr. Lomax. I'll personally thank him again after tomorrow. Old Mr. Lomax is already of such advanced age, yet he's willing to stay up all night to study medical books for Roxanne's sake. This gesture alone is sufficiently moving. Jonathan heaved a soundless sigh before comforting Lucian. There's another day left. We will find a way. Don't worry, Lucian. Lucian grunted indifferently in response and hung up the call the next second, not giving Jonathan the opportunity to say another word. Staring at his dimming phone screen and shifting his gaze to Peregrine, who was flipping through the medical references, Jonathan felt heavy-hearted. Although he had consoled Lucian in that manner earlier, he couldn't deny the cold, hard truth lying before them. The chances of saving Roxanne with the combined effort of only a few of them were very slim. The doctors spent a long time working inside the ward. Their faces were pale when they exited the room. None of them dared to meet Lucian's eyes when they reached the doorway. How is it?" Lucian asked after Madeline came to a halt beside him. Madeline seemed absorbed in her thoughts. She was slightly dazed for a few seconds before regaining her senses upon hearing his voice. A grimace spread across her countenance.
Roxan.
Although the doctors had been trying various methods to soften her blood vessels, the effects were negligible. Roxanne was not looking well at that moment. Madeline had no choice but to repeatedly cheer herself and Roxanne up inwardly, convincing herself to believe Roxanne would survive. Nevertheless, she couldn't tell those things to Lucian. Judging by his ashen face, Madeline reckoned Lucian had stayed up all night again, even though he mentioned he would take a nap. She hesitated to speak. Lucian gazed at her intently and uttered firmly, that's all right. I won't let anything bad happen to her." With that, he turned to look at Roxanne, who was lying inside the ward. Madeline fathomed his intention after taking in his facial expression. She opened her mouth but couldn't bring herself to persuade him otherwise. Between Roxanne's survival and her love life, Madeline would undoubtedly choose the former. Madeline and Lucian entered the ward one after the other. Looking at Roxanne, whose eyes were tightly shut, they felt utterly depressed. Suddenly, Roxanne's phone rang. Madeline glanced at the device and saw Benny's name on the caller ID. Her heart ached when she saw the incoming call, and tears brimmed in her eyes uncontrollably. She couldn't bring herself to reach out and answer the call. Just when she thought of letting the call disconnect on its own, someone stretched out their hand to pick up the phone. That person was Lucian. A look of confusion flashed across Madeline's face when she saw him answering the call. She wondered how he planned to explain the current circumstances to the children. Mommy." The kids' gleeful voices sounded from the other end of the call. They had been dialing Roxanne's number consecutively for 2 to 3 days, but she didn't answer their calls. They were thrilled because she finally picked up their call that day. Lucian gulped when he heard the kids' delightful tone. Even his eyes became slightly reddened. Still, he lowered his head and recomposed himself before saying calmly, "It's me. Your mommy is still occupied with work." Hearing his voice, the kids exchanged glances in puzzlement. Daddy? Isn't mommy on a business trip? Is she back? Otherwise, why would Daddy be using mommy's phone? Lucian silently cleared his throat and said, she's not back yet. I traveled here to meet with your mommy. She encountered some problems at work and required my assistance. The children were dissatisfied upon hearing that. We want to meet with Mommy too. If you can't come here. The living environment here is very harsh. Your mommy and I fear you won't get used to the conditions here. If you were to get sick, your mommy wouldn't have time to care for you all. Naturally, the kids didn't want to add to Roxanne's trouble, so they could only acquiesce to Lucian's decision. All right, can you pass the phone to Mommy, then? Because of the lingering quietness in the ward, the children's voices, originating from the phone speaker, clearly reverberated beside Madeline's ears. Hearing their words and glancing at Roxanne, who was lying on the bed, Madeline couldn't stop her tears from streaming down her cheeks. She covered her mouth and hastily exited the room to prevent the kids from hearing her sobs. Lucian fell silent for a few moments before saying to them, "Your mommy is busy, but she should be back by tomorrow. We'll call you when we arrive at the airport." The kids were worried, as Roxanne had been out of reach for the past few days. However, after Lucian made the promise that they would be returning the next day, the kids relaxed and said, "Okay. Daddy, you must take good care of Mommy." Lucian grunted in acknowledgement. "Give your watch to Ms. Catalina. I need to have a word with her." He heard a rustling sound before Catalina's voice rang out. "Mr. Lucian. How are the children? Did anything unusual happen?" Lucian asked. Catalina glanced at the children on the couch, taking in their wide, expectant eyes. She recalled the past 2 days' events and replied, No. Mr. Archie, Mr. Benny, and Miss Estella were all very well behaved." Then, remembering something, she added, I believe Mr. Archie and Mr. Benny had a phone conversation with their friend overseas, but I'm not sure what they discussed." Lucian pondered over her words for a few moments and confirmed the kids didn't suspect anything. All right. Please do your best to look after them. Thank you for your dedication." Of course. You and Mrs. Farwell take care, too." After the call ended, Lucian gazed at Roxanne and reached out to caress her pale cheek. Did you hear that, Roxanne? The kids are waiting for you to go home. You'll wake up soon, right?" Roxanne remained motionless, her breathing so light and shallow that it was almost imperceptible. Lucian's fists balled up as he seemed to be struggling to make up his mind. Madeline stepped into the ward, her eyes swollen and red from the tears she had shed. Her voice was still unsteady as she asked, Do the kids know?" Lucian shook his head. No. I've asked Catalina, and they have yet low suspect anything as long as Roxanne contacts them before tomorrow night." Tomorrow night? Madeline's heart clenched as she started dreading tomorrow. It was already the second day, so if they still couldn't figure out anything by tomorrow morning, they would have no choice but to agree to Jack's condition. Madeline dreaded the thought of Roxanne's response when the latter eventually regained consciousness, as well as the children's reaction. Before returning to the country, Archie and Benny held a strong prejudice against Lucian. It took Lucian a long time to change their minds about him. If the children discovered he married another woman when Roxanne was severely ill, they would most probably hate him for the rest of his life. Madeline felt a heavy burden of guilt settle in her heart as the thought crossed her mind. I'm sorry, she muttered, her gaze fixed firmly on the ground. Lucian's brows furrowed slightly, as he had no idea why she would suddenly apologize to him. Feeling heavy-hearted, Madeline explained, Because of what happened 6 years ago, I was biased against you and assumed you were a bad. I even told Roxanne to stay away from you. I had no idea you'd do this for her." Lucian's gaze turned dark. "So you don't have to apologize to me. It was my fault 6 years ago. I will make it up to her now. 6 years ago, I wronged Roxanne. Little did I know that I would be making the same mistake again 6 years later. If I had been more aware of my emotions and acted on them when I was younger, or if I had taken it upon myself to set her free when we bumped into each other again after so many years, she would not have had to go through so much." They both waited hopefully until the afternoon. Time ticked away, and it was soon 3 in the afternoon. Alas, no one could figure out a way to save Roxanne. Madeline felt a wave of anxiety wash over her, and she felt completely lost. Her gaze kept shifting to Lucian. She wanted to ask him what they should do. Lucian remained unfazed. His face was as cold as ice. Seeing his reaction, Madeline blurted out, Mr. Farwell, are we still going to wait? Should we call old Mr. Lomax? Lucian met her gaze and said firmly, I need to leave. Take care of Roxanne. I'm not sure when I'll be back. Madeline asked anxiously, where are you going at this hour? Lucian's gaze landed on Roxanne, who was lying in bed silently. A flash of determination appeared in his eyes and disappeared. I'm going to Jack. Madeline waned incredulous. What? Are you seriously going to? She trailed off and clenched her jaw. Despite her strong desire to reach out and grab his sleeve to prevent him from leaving, she didn't dare do so, as he seemed really intimidating. She merely gave him a look of disapproval. There is still time. Let's wait instead of giving in to Jack now. Lucian paid no heed to her and turned to leave. I can't wait anymore. It's too risky, and I can't bear the thought of putting Roxanne's life in danger. Madeline parted her lips, but she couldn't say anything to stop him from leaving. After all, she knew she would do the same if she were in his shoes. They couldn't afford to risk Roxanne's life. Lucian strode out of the ward, his face expressionless. He walked through the corridor, passing by a group of specialists. Everyone couldn't help but wonder what was going on after seeing him. Is Mr. Farwell going to give up on Dr. Jarvis? Dr. Jarvis' condition is deteriorating, but he doesn't seem anxious at all. I don't think so. We saw how distressed he has been in the past few days. He even invited old Mr. Lomax here. Why would he give up suddenly? As the elevator doors slid shut, everyone else raised their voices, eager to discuss the possibilities. Hearing the commotion, Madeline marched out of the ward and gave them a pointed look. Everyone, if you are free, then I suggest getting back to work trying to figure out how to treat Roxanne instead of wasting time gossiping here. No one knew better than her that Lucian had never thought about giving up on Roxanne. He was actually giving up on himself. The specialists were determined to treat Roxanne, but couldn't help gossiping when they noticed Lucian leaving. It was normal for Madeline to lash out at them, and they understood her feelings well. They got back to work instantly. Madeline glanced at the elevator, which had finally reached the parking lot level. She then turned to look at her best friend, who was oblivious to everything. The agony that flickered across her face revealed the inner turmoil she was experiencing. In the parking lot, Lucian sat in his car for a long time without revving up the engine. He had assumed he could accept the reality as long as Roxanne could survive. Even though he was on the verge of losing her, Lucian could not rid himself of his own selfish desires. Is accepting Jack's conditions the only way out? Lucian waited in the car for almost half an hour, but there was no update. Finally, he pulled out his phone to call Jack. The phone rang for almost 1 minute before Jack answered the call. Who is this? Jack's voice was dripping with arrogance and disdain. Lucian responded calmly, It's me, Lucian. Oh, it's you, Jack drawled in exaggeration as though he had just realized who it was. Mr. Farwell, hello. I thought it was someone else who was rude enough to interrupt me while I was busy working. He was saying that Lucian was rude enough to interrupt him at work. Lucian pretended to be oblivious to Jack's mockery and replied calmly, It looks like I picked the wrong time to call. Mr. Damaris, if you're occupied, then you can call me back when you're free. He fell silent after saying that but didn't end the call. On the other end of the phone, Jack grew flustered when he heard Lucian indicating that he wanted to end the conversation. Wait a minute. Lucian arched a brow, for Jack's reaction was within his anticipation. No matter how busy my schedule may be, I need to make time for you since you took the initiative to call me, Mr. Farwell. Jack sneered. How can I help you? If my memory serves me correctly, it isn't time yet as we agreed upon 3 days. Lucian was unperturbed. As long as I'm willing to give in, any day works. I believe you never wanted anything to happen to Roxanne, do you? Most of Jack's requests involved Roxan, so if anything were to happen to her, even if Jack got the Research Institute for himself, he would never be able to realize its maximum potential. Hearing that, Jack grew increasingly smug. "You're right, Mr. Farwell. That was what I thought, too." Lucian ignored his arrogance and said, Since we have reached an agreement, are you free tonight? Let's talk in person. Remember to bring the antidote along, Mr. Demaris." Jack chuckled. Of course. I would be delighted to meet with you, Mr. Farwell, at any time that is convenient for you." They agreed on the time and location before hanging up. Jack was brimming with conceit as he sat in his chair in the office.
"A business genius, who?"
"He is no match for me." Having overheard their exchange, Kevin felt a chill go down his spine. "I am astounded that Mr. Demaris had such a callous disregard for human life that he would resort to using a person's life to threaten Mr. Farwell. It is even more distressing that Mr. Farwell proved to be so pliable as to give in to the threat. I heard Lucian had brought in specialists from all around the world in an attempt to treat Roxan, but despite his best efforts, he still required my assistance," Jack said with disdain. "Didn't I tell him that I'm the only one who has the power to save her, since it was me who poisoned her in the first place?" He then glared at Kevin. What are you doing? Hurry, reserve a table at the restaurant." Kevin snapped out of his reverie and nodded readily. Got it. Mr. Demaris, I'll go handle it right away." He spun on his heels and fled the office. Kevin closed the door firmly behind him, shutting out the chill of the room and the oppressive atmosphere he had just been subjected to. Taking a deep breath, he allowed himself a moment to relax and gather his composure before leaving to carry out Jack's orders. After Jack sent Hector away, chaos ensued within Demaris Group. In an effort to regain control, Jack resorted to the use of extreme and forceful methods to restore order within the organization. Jack took decisive action against those who went against him. Others might have been unhappy with his decisions, but they kept their objections to themselves, not wanting to risk incurring his wrath. Because of that, Jack started doing as he wished in Demaris Group. It was only 5 in the afternoon. He was supposed to attend a meeting in the evening, but he decided to leave the company. He took the antidote with him and strolled out leisurely. At 6 in the evening, they met at the restaurant. Lucian did not have the patience to wait, so he immediately headed there after ending the call. When Jack arrived, the table in front of him was bare except for a single glass of water. It was obvious that Lucian had used the same reason to stop the server from serving them the dishes. Jack was inwardly displeased, and his smile was cold. "I'm pleasantly surprised that you were willing to wait for me, Mr. Farwell." Jack strode across the room and took his seat 2 chairs away from Lucian. "You should have let me know if you dislike the food here." Lucian glanced at Jack as though he had just realized the latter was around. It's not that. I don't think it's necessary to eat here, that's all." With that, he went straight to the topic. "I've prepared the property transfer agreement for the 10 companies. Once you have signed the agreement, you will take possession of the companies. As for the Research Institute, they signed the indemnity contract to officially terminate our collaboration. This contract is also included inside." He retrieved a file and pushed it to Jack coolly. Jack was surprised to see the file, but it wasn't long before his expression changed to one of smug satisfaction. "Turns out it's pretty satisfying to see Lucian give in to me. To have the opportunity to get the better of Lucian and make him plead for my help is something that doesn't come around often. I must make the most of it." He flashed a smirk and pushed the file aside without seeing what was inside. If you had known it would come to this, why would you reject me 2 days ago?" Jack asked. Didn't you say you'd exhaust your wealth and resources to save Ms. Jarvis? How is she doing now?" Something glinted across Lucian's eyes when Roxan was mentioned, but he quickly calmed down. No matter what, I believe she'll regain consciousness tomorrow, as long as you give me the antidote as promised, Mr. Demaris." A smile nudged Jack's lips as he said slowly, Don't worry. There's no need to rush. I believe you still haven't fulfilled all of my conditions. Once everything is done, I'll deliver the antidote to you." Lucian's gaze swept over him. The expression on Jack's face was one of haughty confidence and conceit. He looks certain that I have no choice but to ask for his help. Lucian had been mentally preparing himself to accept his condition before he arrived at this location. However, upon his arrival, he found himself unable to say so. "I heard that you had hired many experienced doctors to diagnose Miss Jarvis. It looks like she's unconscious now. It seems that those foolish doctors have yet to determine how my drug functions, huh? It's no surprise that the medical industry is in such a state. Anyone can call themselves an expert as long as they have worked in the field for a long period of time." Realizing he had gone off topic, Jack snorted. "Don't worry. Even if they manage to find the root of the problem, that doesn't mean they can find a solution. I had to peruse the ancient medicine books of the Damaris family extensively before I could develop this drug." Comprehension dawned on Lucian. No wonder old Mr. Lomax couldn't locate the antidote despite his extensive study of medical books, as TT was revealed that the solution lies solely within the ancient medicine books of the Damaris family. It is not surprising that this information was not documented in other sources. After Jack explained about the drug he developed, he asked cheerily, "So, Mr. Farwell? Have you considered my third condition?" Despite his initial shock, Lucian regained his composure and met Jack's gaze calmly. "You have my word." Jack was still unsatisfied. Just that? What about proof?" "Without proof, how can I be sure that you are not lying to me? I trust your character, but I went through a lot of effort to create the antidote. I don't want to get tricked." Lucian furrowed his brows. What kind of proof do you need?" Jack arched a brow and said readily, "Your marriage certificate, of course. It's too late now. The city hall should be closed. If you announce to the public that you're marrying someone else, I'll take that, too." With that, he shot Lucian a provoking look. Jack knew precisely which condition was most unacceptable to Lucian, so he was eager to observe Lucian's distress after he brought up the condition again. "I will certainly relish the sight of the high and mighty CEO of Farwell Group suffering before me." All right." Lucian nodded calmly. Jack frowned as surprise and displeasure flitted across his gaze. What did you just say?" He did not expect Lucian's reaction and was thoroughly disappointed. This is the moment I've been eagerly anticipating. How could Lucian be this calm? Why isn't he hesitating or experiencing any reservations about having to leave Roxan? How could he say yes so easily? A mocking grin played on Lucian's lips. "I've already considered the 3 conditions carefully and made up my mind before asking to meet you. However, it was a careless mistake on my part, as I didn't get the proof ready for you. I'll leave to take care of it right away." He then got up to leave. He didn't show any signs of begging for mercy and portrayed an air of superiority as if he had complete command of the situation. Jack's face contorted in fury as he watched Lucian leave. A long while later, he rose to his feet and, in a fit of rage, sent all the items on the table crashing to the floor with a powerful sweep of his arm. The glass shattered into hundreds of tiny shards as it hit the ground with an almighty crash. Outside, the server heard the commotion. Concerned that some sort of accident might have occurred, he rushed in to investigate. However, he was met with an enraged Jack. Who allowed you to come in? Get out." The server trembled in fear and nodded profusely before leaving Jack alone. Another ruckus sounded in the room. Jack would flip the table over if he could. Lucian had to ask for my help. Who does he think he is? How could he act all arrogant? After losing the 10 subsidiaries, Farwell Group is likely to suffer a steep decline that would soon bring him down to the same level as the Damaris family. Despite this, he had the nerve to come to me with such confidence. Jack returned to his seat, his face flushed with anger. His fury only subsided when he remembered that Lucian was about to marry someone else soon. So what if Lucian acts all high and mighty? He'll have to listen to me in the end. After he marries someone else, there will be no going back. I'll figure out a way to win Roxanne's heart and trample Lucian beneath my feet. At 7 that evening, Lucian's car rolled to a stop before the Farwell main residence. The house was brightly lit. Lucian sat in the car for a few minutes before eventually stepping out, his footsteps echoing loudly off the pavement. He walked from the gate to the door of the main building. On the way, he didn't forget to recompose himself. Mr. Lucian. The butler came out to greet him. Mr. and Mrs. Farwell are having dinner inside. Lucian nodded and headed into the mansion with him. Inside, he saw Sonia and Elias sitting at the dining table. Sonia and Elias appeared to be discussing something, with Sonia seemingly unhappy and Elias seemingly powerless to do anything. Upon spotting Lucian, Elias asked, "What brings you here? Have you had anything to eat? If not, want to join us?" Lucian nodded and settled in the seat across from Sonia. Sonia parted her lips and said, "You came at the right time. Your dad and I were talking about Electra. You remember her, right? She's from the Lane family and grew up with you." Lucian belatedly remembered such a person existed after hearing his mother's words. They had indeed grown up together, but the Lane family had gone overseas a few years ago. Electra came back a few days ago and was telling us she wanted to meet you but didn't know when you would be free. Sonia continued. I think she's a great match for you and would be a lot better than Roxanne. She's kind and gentle, so you won't have to worry about her causing trouble like Aubrey. She had been trying to explain her view to Elias, but he held fast to his own thought and thought her to be wrong. That was why the atmosphere seemed tense earlier. Elias thought she shouldn't be saying that and interjected, "Just stop interfering in Lucian's relationship. It has been years since they last met, so Electra might not think that way." Sonia huffed in displeasure. Lucian is a capable man. Even if Electra doesn't have feelings for him now, if they spend more time together, her feelings for him may develop and grow over time. How can you be sure she doesn't love him? They started arguing again and completely forgot about Lucian. "You can talk to her," Lucian suddenly said. Silence fell after he said those words. Both Sonia and Elias gazed at him in disbelief. What did you just say?" Elias was the first to regain his composure. He frowned as he put his fork down. Lucian reiterated, "But since you both think she's nice, you can approach her. That I have no objections if she's interested in becoming my wife." The reason he came to Sonia was that Aubrey was the only woman he had been in contact with over the years. Despite agreeing with Jack's condition to marry another woman, he couldn't find any suitable candidate. He had to seek his mother's help. She had never liked Roxanne and would definitely look around for other suitable women. Be it Electra or another woman, he didn't mind, for they weren't Roxanne. All he needed was a woman who would marry him as soon as possible. Sonia and Elias shared a look before giving Lucian a pointed one. They refused to believe that he would suddenly change his mind. "So, you want to marry Electra now? But what about Roxanne? I thought you were adamant about marrying her a while ago. And what about Essie?" Elias asked sternly.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.